So good evening Kayhan.
Good evening.
Good evening to all our virtual participants. It's a joy and a pleasure to be here with Ustad Kayhan Kalhor and Behnam Samani, and that tomorrow night we'll play a concert, the first concert after a long period of silence due to pandemic reasons. And the concert will be performed by Kayhan Kalhor on fiddle Comanche and Behnam Samani on Zarbor Tombak. It's a different name according to Arab name or Farsi name. And there are a lot of things to discuss with such a master as Kayhan Kalhor. But I would like to keep it very easy, simple and like a conversation.
Yes, of course.
And I think that our listeners are interested to know who was your master and what is the radif you studied.
I studied with Ustad Ahmad Muhajir, who was one of the best pupils of Ustad Sabah. And I studied the radif of Ustad Sabah with him. And then later on, when I started to play Comanche myself, because there were no Comanche masters when I started. I mean, there was just Ustad Bahari in Tehran, and we were living in another city, Kermanshah in western Iran. So I had to start by myself, started to learn the technique, to listen to the old material, whatever existed, and then played the radif of Mirza Abdullah on Comanche. And then I had several teachers for radif, not for Comanche. I moved to Tehran. I studied the radif partly with Pashan Kamkar and others, but mainly I was responsible to learn all the radifs that I tried to learn. I played the radif of Mirza Abdullah, and I played the radif of Ustad Sabah, and later on I played Mirza Hossein Qoli as well. I devoted a year to play that radif, but that really doesn't mean anything because they're all the same, with a little difference. It's a long story if we want to study what the radif is and what are the differences.
Please tell us the story, what a radif is.
The radif is basically a collection of melodies that we learn as a student. These melodies in different schools of radif can be anywhere from 250 to 450, depends. But what is important is for us as students to memorize those melodies and use them as basis, as a reference point to be able to improvise. And that is the story, basically. You learn all of these melodies and have to memorize them as a student. But to remain very close to your radif knowledge or to depart from it, that's the whole story and the whole discussion within the musical community now. We have traditionalists who say, well, you have to stay very close to the radif and still play radif material all the time, even at the concert. But there is another way of thinking that we have to leave the radif when we learn it, and it's gonna exist in our mind, somewhere in the back of our mind, and we have to be able to improvise because the way you think of radif, it could be very independent or very dependent, So I was among the ones who tried to keep the distance between the material that I learned as a student and that material that I play on stage in a concert, for example. There is this story, old story in Persian that someone that I always tell my students the same story because it's a nice one and it just serves properly. There is this person that goes to a famous poet, let's say 1,000 years ago, and says, I want to write poetry, I want to become a poet. And so, well, okay, but first you have to go and memorize 30,000 verses of poetry. And, wow, that's a lot. Well, if you want to be a poet, that's what you should do because you have to learn what poetry is and different styles of different poets. So the guy goes away and memorizes 30,000 verses of poetry. After 10 years, he comes back to the famous poet and says, well, I did it, I have memorized 30,000 verses of poetry. And the famous poet says, well, now you can forget it.
Of course.
So, that's the trick. To know how to forget, to learn and forget. I think that's the most prominent aspect of playing Radif. I don't tend to teach Radif. I think knowing Radif by bits and pieces is for teachers. I never tried to do that. So I was among the ones who actually learned the Radif and forgot it on purpose because I wanted to be independent from it. What I use is pieces of Radif, of course, like everybody else. But I don't limit myself to just play that. What I also did was to bring in a lot of folk material to Persian music. I mean, I wasn't the only one who did that. The teacher of my teacher was among the first to think of that. He brought the material from folk music from northern Iran to his compositions, and he was regarded highly. But you have to become Sabah to be able to do that because it was unacceptable in those days, But I tried to bring a lot of folk melodies from Kurdistan, from Khorasan, from other regions of Iran, and mix it with the material with Radif because, that is where the material in Radif comes from. At some point, the Radif material were gathered together in cities, in capital cities or bigger cities. But where they came from is never discussed, so they existed already. But they were put together and called Radif, which means sequence. So they put it in a sequence, that's all they did, to be able to teach it. So folk music is very, very important. So there is also important to listen and learn, the pieces in folk music, to use it between your traditional Radif material. This wasn't practical or practiced in the days that Radif was only listened to or played by the elite.
Yeah, of course.
This didn't exist when the Radif was practiced in court music, because in court music you have to be very proper, and it's hard to become a little detached from the original material, like the Ottoman music that that they have to stay within a certain kind of repertoire.
It's the same thing in Ottoman music because a lot of music came from the court of Constantinople, but came from Kurdish, from Ajamlar,
of course,
first, because it was an empire with a lot of it. And Armenians.
Yeah, this is what happened to Radif in Persia. All of the very distinguished musicians from all of Iran, came to bigger cities because they were in search of employment. The courts hired them because they were good musicians, good artists. This happened in every art. So they put them all together, and these musicians discussed their music. And at some point, this transition from Maqam system to Radif system happened. So I don't think of it as something that godsend. You know, I think
Yeah.
of it as older material renewing themselves all the time. And speaking of traditions, you know, we can become very flat or sometimes stupid, you know, to discuss what is the tradition. You know,
There is a difference between tradition and traditionalism.
exactly. And what is the tradition? You know, in Italy, we talk about, you know, different periods. You know, Etruscans, you know, Romans, and then Renaissance, Gothic, you know, all this different style. And then which one is tradition? Which one is traditional? You know, if you don't want to grow, if you don't want to come out of that, you know, everybody still should build buildings like Etruscans, you know. But traditions change. What is important is to know that traditions are subject to change and subject to
moving.
breed. Exactly. And nobody plays like their teacher. And their teachers never played like their teachers, especially in my musical culture, the musical culture that I come from, or any improvisational musical culture. I do not play like my teacher. That's a no. And then how, in the same time, should I be a traditionalist but not imitate my teacher?
And yet, in Ottoman music and in Persian music, there is a lot of clones. So people
Yes.
playing exactly.
Exactly. We have thousands of them, you know, millions. Yeah, that's a problem because, you know, that's being a technician or an engineer, you know, still not an artist, you know, to start to do something that didn't exist before. That is art, you know. That is the difference between Picasso and someone who paints on the streets of Paris still, you know. So this is the difference, you know. He created it, but the others imitated. So that is, to me, that is called art. And if you bring something new within the tradition, I mean, this is why we learn the traditional side of the music. We were responsible to do that. But in order to change it and go further, which is the destiny, you know, you have to know the traditional material really well. And sometimes you see these younger musicians who actually don't know about that. You know, they just go from or they want to go from the station one to that, you know, where they want to land, and they call it innovation. But, you know, I think it is very, very necessary to know the history and to become familiar with it, to play the radif, you know, all styles of it. But it is also necessary to know that you have to take it a bit further, that nobody else played it that way. We have a very good example of that, Ustad Jalil Shahnaz, you know.
Yeah.
He's a superb musician, but he played the tar the way that, you know, nobody else did. After Mirza Hussein Qoli and all those traditional Qajar musicians that were really superb musicians, you know, after he died, you know, people said, well, tar is finished, you know, but tar was not finished, you know, he just took another direction. And many different players played it differently, especially him, and he did something that nobody else is able to do. But there are other ways, you know, we don't have to follow somebody else's way. We you know, the art is to be able to create a new way and to create something that didn't exist before, but based on what you know and the traditional should suggest to you.
Many questions arise.
Complicated.
In no. Many questions arise in my mind because, of course, Stravinsky or Picasso, as Luciano Berio, knew very well
Bartok.
the masters of
Yeah,
Bartok,
yeah.
the masters of
Smetana,
the
yeah.
president
Exactly.
of their history, but they transcended it.
Yes.
Because they love it. But I will go back to the point of the improvisation as the most high point.
Yes.
So in Radif, we have a lot of improvised part, goucher
Yes.
or things like this, improvised. First of all, I would like to ask you, how do you call in Farsi Radif? In Farsi improvisation, sorry.
Bedahe Navazi.
Bedahe Navazi.
Bedahe.
Bedahe
Bedahe
Navazi.
means just creating right on the spot. Bedahe, and Bedahe Surai would be for poets. Just, they used to have this duels, that they set in the same place, and they improvised. And somebody says something, and the answer, and another poet.
As oral poets, yeah.
Yeah, this is a very important element in Persian.
Sarrepentina.
Yeah.
We have a master here, Marco Luzzu, about this process.
This is a very important element in Persian culture and art.
Yeah.
So it doesn't only exist in music; it exists in everything else, in painting, in poetry, in in everything else as well. It's important.
Very important. And about this, it's particular the fact that you concentrate on improvisation. As far as I know, not on music, for example, but also in Arabic, you have the sair. So you begin with a rast, for example, a given note around that. Then you move to the fifth. You have some itineraries.
Yeah. You have some kind of directions that you must go. Yes.
Yeah, a direction, an itinerary, and you can travel on it.
Yeah.
How can you describe your improvisation right now, as we will listen tomorrow night, and as I listen to in some concerts go? Because the concert, as far as I know, is completely linked to improvisation.
Yes,
it's up to you to describe.
As I said, of course, the first section is to decide what mode or what daska you want to play in.
You decided before the concert or right on the spot?
No, sometimes I just tune my instrument in backstage or on stage and see, and look at the audience and say what feels good.
Ancient style.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely, because we have a sign of this, depend from the audience.
Yeah, and what time of day it is, how you feel. It just, sometimes you want to play Mahur, but when you sit on stage, you see, well, Nava feels better. But that shouldn't limit you to go from one daska to another and change in between, I'm not hesitant of that, and usually for the audience who are not very familiar with Persian music, I try to start with lighter modes.
What do you mean for lighter modes?
The ones like Mahur, Isfahan, Nava, the modes that are more recognizable for Western ears, and then later on I switched to, again, lightly to other tonalities that, to introduce them to the possibilities that actually Radif teaches us, in a basic form. It's nice to go with the flow, and then what you want to play presents itself. You don't have to think of it. I think of myself as a player as someone who's there.
Okay. An instrument.
An instrument, but the instrument is played by something else, by some other kind of motivations. I don't decide. I don't think. Maybe it sounds strange, but I don't know. That thing comes and goes through me, and it's produced.
It's clear.
And sometimes, I feel like, I'm sitting up there and somebody down there is playing the instrument. I'm listening, So that's the best way that, if it happens, and sometimes it happens, I'm just there and I'm listening. I'm somewhere else. I'm listening just like you.
There is a term that ethnomusicologists really like about improvisation. That is compositions in real time.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Exactly. Oh, yeah, exactly. And it has a little difference with composition. I wouldn't call it a composition because again, a composition is a piece that you decide to write, and you have room to correct and rewrite and polish, you know, but you don't have time to polish or correct
Of
or
course.
rewrite when you improvise. It's an act of an artist to work in front of you without a chance to correct it, you know, and that's the scary part, because whatever happens, it happens right there. You cannot go back. It's not like a recording. It's not like a, you know, painting that you could just paint over it. It's something that happens there. And, you know, if everything goes well and what you like happens and goes to the same direction, it is which is subject to, you know, what kind of audience do you have, what kind of place do you have, you know, what kind of mood you're in. And if that happens, that's the best possible way. That's where I go sit over there and the musician down there plays. Yeah.
This take us to took into exam the aesthetic part
Yes.
and philosophical part.
Yes.
So I would like you to
I'm into philosophy myself, so more than music. Yeah, because they go hand in hand. You know, without philosophy,
course.
life doesn't mean anything. I mean,
No, of course,
yeah.
I understand, and I agree with you. And but I would like you to comment for everybody here and for our audience the two key concepts of hal and waqt.
And wacht. Hal is the state of mind. If, you know, I could give you an example, you know, in Western music, you know, there are many players who play Mozart, let's say piano players, and who play Beethoven, and who play Satie, you know, but there is one person that brings out what the composer meant at that moment. There is Glenn Gould, for example, who plays Bach, not like nobody played before and nobody plays right now, you know. He knew what was happening. He brought that, the characteristics of music into the front. You know, there is someone who plays Satie the way it should be played. And you understand that as a member of audience or a listener. You know, it takes you to a certain state of mind, state of being, and you start enjoying music. The rest is not music, you know. The other people who cannot do this to you, they're not good musicians. You know, we have this in Persian music, we call it hal. We say somebody's playing has hal in it and somebody else's doesn't. It's just technique, you know, and the technique can always be there. It could be acquired, but hal cannot be acquired. It's something that a person is born with or not, you know, and you could hear that in jazz.
Of course.
And classical music, in every kind of music. You know, a certain conductor, you know, conducts a certain piece the way that it means something different, you know, and takes you with it. You might have heard that piece 100 times before with other orchestras, other conductors, but that particular conductor is able to take you somewhere else. Make you listen to that music, that symphony, that concerto, whatever, the way you've never heard it. That is hal.
And waqt?
Waqt is time.
Yeah.
Time of the day or time of playing. That, again, is not particular to music. It applies to every kind of art, you know. You will not read a piece of poetry that doesn't fit a certain criteria or certain place that you're sitting in. You know, it's a skill that you play a certain piece of music or recite a certain piece of poetry or other arts that belongs to that particular time. And suddenly you feel closer to it. You're sad, okay, you need something sad. You're happy, you need something happy, you know. You're in presence of, you know, someone great or someone important. You have to do something, you know, proper. So that is the concept of waqt or waqt, you know. And that is important as well, you know. And the waqt dictates you how to improvise. They go hand in hand. They don't function separately.
A particular question regarding your palette of sounds, of timbres,
Yes.
because you are unique in this, you know this.
Thank you for saying that. I don't think that way, but thank
Normally,
you.
people play melodically Kamancheh
Yes.
with long notes,
Yes.
and while you use a lot of pizzicato and techniques and sound from the table of the instruments.
Yeah.
Can you comment?
Well, again, when we think about traditions, what existed before, you know, I came to copy and listen to many great older musicians, older generation musicians. And they were all great, you know. But in order to be myself, you know, and this is not about, you know, sitting down and thinking about what I want to do next. It just happens in your mind based on, you know, the technical abilities that you have and everything. So it happens, you form as a musician, you know. When I was 15, I played a certain way and I thought a certain way. When I was 20, I did the same, you know. It's a journey and it changes every day. But I thought maybe we could do technically more with this instrument.
Yeah.
And I think there were many things that were missing. And still missing because I can't do everything. You know, of course, the next generation should.
You already do something?
Well, if I didn't do it, you know, somebody else would do it because it was time to, you know, for that thing to happen.
Open the instrument.
Yes, yes. You know, we're living in 21st century, and a lot of differences in our lives, in many different aspects, in technology. You know, everything was rapidly changing. So the music cannot stay there and belong to the court that doesn't exist anymore.
Of course.
You know, so
maybe yes.
yeah, this is what I call you know, recycling.
Of course.
Yeah, all those traditional materials, you know, they can be recycled in a better ways and you know, they could change, but based on the traditions, but speaking today's language to younger generation. So I strongly believe that we have to change elements to make people to understand the old element better, you know.
About languages.
Yes.
We talk about the Persianate, the vast area of language and literature and Persian language and literature. This is called the Persianate. Did you get some reactions by other Kamancheh players? Because Kamancheh is everywhere. I mean, in Central Asia, even if they call
Nowadays
it gijak,
nowadays it's a more popular instrument. And even in Iran, we have many different Kamancheh players and younger generation who are after learning how to play Kamancheh.
But did you get reactions from Azerbaijan, for example, or Uzbekistan, or from around the world? Did you other Kamancheh players contact you?
I'm always in contact with others. Okay. You know, listen to them, or we're friends and we talk about music. I think certain pockets of music that belong to Persian music in an older way. You know, I see Persian music as a mother for of music of that region, and certain pockets of it might stay more within that rigid tradition, and the change comes more difficultly. Yeah. But in time, they will change as well, because you cannot do the same thing over and over and over for generations and generations. So I think if there was a resistance, towards what I did, in which there was in Iran, people say, well, this is not traditional music, this child is, there is always that. But you should just be courageous enough to change things and to do your thing. And if it's worthy enough for people to listen to it, it finds its way. And old masters say, well, yeah, maybe there is something into that too, just let's listen to that. But nothing's absolute in this world. So,
There is a lot of players that in the territories of Persianate, but also in Maghreb,
Yeah.
that play violin as a
yeah,
Comanche,
like Comanche, yeah.
upright.
Yeah.
Did you never try to play violin? Did you get some experience on this? What do you think about violin as an instrument?
When I started to play Comanche, violin took over. There was all violins around us. Everybody played Persian violin.
Terrible instrument.
I wanted to take it, different way. I actually wanted to play Comanche because there was too much violin going on. And that I started with violin with Ahmad Majer. He was a violin player, but later on, I became very, very interested in Comanche sound. And there is always the sound that draws you to a certain direction, and then how you choose a musical instrument. And I always got this satisfaction with Comanche sound. And I try to exaggerate it, with my playing. The low is really beautiful, hearty, like humans singing or lamenting or everything. So I spent a lot of time, to produce that good low or lower than it was before. I think the sound has a lot to do with music, and it's one of the things that occupies my mind. I don't want to play a lot of good material with bad sound. So what I wanted to create for myself was a distinct sound, and still it is that way. But when you're younger, you play a lot of technical things, fast things, and well, I can play this. But when you grow with music, you're older, the story is different. Sometimes you play one note, and that does it for you.
It's enough.
You're there.
It's enough.
So it's enough. Yeah. So the story changes. I think I never wanted to play Persian violin, and there are already good players doing that. But really, what it was in Comanche, all the characteristics, all the package of Comanche, I really loved, and that was why I pursued to play.
You will
Comanche.
play tomorrow night with a
I hope
beautiful.
so.
We hope so. But you will play tomorrow night with a beautiful tombak player.
Yes.
So I would like you to comment the rhythmic side of music, of your music. I'm not speaking exactly of Radif. We know that at a certain point arrived Hossein Tehrani and the Zarb changed.
Yes.
Also Jamshid Shemirani that was here on this stage. But your ideas about rhythm, Zarbiya, Usul, as we call it,
Yeah.
or Iqrat.
I will play with Mr. Behnam Samani, who's a wonderful tombak player. And believe it or not, we just, I start a rhythmic cycle and he follows. And basically we try to listen to each other and create the rhythmic cycles based on what we play and where we go. That is improvised as well.
In fact.
Yeah. We don't decide about the rhythmic cycles that we play, before the concert.
Of course. You decide on the spot the rhythmic cycle.
Right.
This is quite, of course, it's also quite different from compositions of Radif
Yes.
or Ottoman classical music because you have an iqat or usul
Yes.
fixed from the beginning
Yes.
and until the end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Apart some modulations of change.
Yeah, well, traditionally, we are not taught, or we don't, we're not taught to think within a rhythmic cycle. Everything we learn is free rhythm in the Radif. And then if you want to play a certain piece, when you're more advanced as student, you know, then you start to play compositions that are rhythmic. Rhythm in Radif music is always, it's subject to talk about. There is nothing established there. What is established came in the beginning of 20th century, basically, you know, when they started to have an audience. And so they couldn't, you know, just do this free music for,
yeah, of course.
you know, free
boring,
written music
yeah.
for an hour. They wanted to have something played in the beginning and something at the end, and then the songs, the tasnifs, you know. So the composition based on Radif became more important. Not that it didn't exist before. It did exist, but it wasn't that important. So there were certain musicians that started to compose pieces for instruments or compose pieces for a couple of instruments and a singer. That is how new this element is in Persian music. You know, we always call it traditional music, but in traditions those didn't exist. Only the rhythmic parts or zarbi from the radif that people played. And of course, you know, tasnifs that they usually have slow six. Da, you know, this is the basic rhythm. As you know, Indian music that you have, you know, 16. You know, we have the six that traditionally dictates everything. But you know, as a modern player, that doesn't mean that you have to do that. You know, so we play all sort of different, you know, rhythms like 6, 5, 7, you know, whatever, to be able to express better what is in our mind. So I think, you know, that is the way to go, and I've been doing that as well.
I would like to close with a question on you, on your career, because I would like to really...
Nothing to answer.
No.
Blank.
About nothing to... On the position of your musical, then international music scene, on the global scenario, because you are playing with your Yoma, another, you are one of your virtues is to put yourself in relations with musicians from
in
other
danger.
traditions. So,
yeah.
how and I know that a lot of people listening to you coming from ACM experience,
yes,
or having listened to Keith Jarrett.
For something
that kind of
is not traditional Persian music, yes.
Of improvisation as Marcus Stockhausen,
yeah,
of intuitive music,
yes,
concept in
yes,
Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. So I would like you to describe your position on the planetarian music scene.
You see, what I do as a musician with a Iranian musician with other musical cultures or players from other musical cultures, it is a part of it is actually very traditional, because I play with an Indian musician, I play with a Turkish musician, I play with musician from Mali, and they're all improvisers. So why shouldn't I improvise with them and try to see what are the possibilities? It's like creating another language that didn't exist before. But yet it's a language that we had before. You know, it's true, this is done through improvisation. But, you know, I think getting out of your comfort zone and playing with others, musicians from other traditions, you know, allows you to access more listeners. You know, when I started to play the Ghazal project with Shujat Hussein Khan, we didn't know what we just sat down together and we improvised with a tabla player, and it became popular. You know, people liked it. And nowadays, a lot of North Indian people come to my concert to listen to my Persian music, you know. And the same, you know, a lot of Iranians go to Shujat's concert to listen because they know him from that particular project. Same with Erdal Erzincan and others. So I don't think it's dangerous, you know, as we talked about this recycling music, bringing new elements to it. the new element doesn't have to come within your music, you know, it can come from outside as well. As long as we know that there is a border, you know, between what we do as a Persian musician and what we do as someone who plays with others. I never try to mix both. You know, I have my Persian music side as a musician, and I have my projects with other musicians, which I think at the end helps Persian music, the music of Iran and Iranian culture, more than it helps me. You know, we have a mission to do that. We have a mission to let others know about what we do. You know, and this way I get a larger angle for people to see this music. It's not about me because, you know, I'm here now, and then, you know, in a few decades I'm not here anymore. But I think it will help the musical culture, and it stays there, and hopefully some people that would never listen to Persian music, you know, will listen from now on if I play with Yo-Yo Ma. You know, because he's a super famous player and everybody knows him. So those people who listen to pure classical music all the time, they would never go after Kamancha and listen to, but after this project, they will.
Yeah, I see.
So it's a way of introduction and making others think that the music that you know and you love and you listen to is not the only kind of music. There are other things as well. You know, and I've been trying to learn the same thing in life. You know, I didn't value North Indian music when I was 15. I didn't value classical music when I was 17. You know, so you learn, and because, you know, some people just sitting in the, you know, in the old times, you know, 2 centuries ago, our masters were at their home and they were the best players of the country or the region. You know, they never knew that there is beautiful music going on in North Africa or somewhere else, or North India or South India. You know, so it's a possibility. It's product of this world getting smaller as a result of our mind becomes bigger, you know, and the technology that makes that possible.
I think that it's more than enough.
Okay, good.
It's more than enough, I mean, from the inner sense. Everybody can listen more than enough in your concert tomorrow night.
Thank you.
Without blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And with music and sounds.
Yeah.
And for this, we are
so.
grateful to the Fondazione Giorgio Cini and the Institute for Comparative Music Studies, here directed by Giovanni Giuriati, and we are grateful to Sabrina Marenko and Chiara Picardi, and to Marco Luzzu, that is an important ethnomusicologist that here filmed us. And thank you very much. Thank you. Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.